Thanks for joining us, everybody. Welcome to the fifth episode of the Blowback podcast. Blowback, observing Imperial decline. Are we observing? No, we're documenting Imperial decline, and there's a lot to document. Um, Ben, you want to start us off with?
Well, I'm wearing my one of my favorite shirts, which is granted to me for one of my birthdays. It's got the 1933 anthem on the back of it in Cyrillic, and I want that in memory of Vadim Papura, who was a young communist patriot in the Odessa region. You can shortly see some pictures of this young man, and he would have turned 27 yesterday. Instead, he lived half as much as me. He died 10 years ago near the Odessa massacre, which has been rebranded on Twitter to be the clashes near, the trade union building because fascist thugs beat him to death. And they tell me to this day about this unprovoked invasion, that this conflict was launched February 2022. Yet this happened 10 years ago, and there are consequences. I wanted to launch with that because it gets me emotional, but we are not in that much of a negative mood. It's just a bit of remembrance that we should have. But we have some breaking news everywhere. We had the Aspen Security Conference, all pretty much propaganda. We had movements in the, what do you call it, diplomatic sphere, none bigger than the most recent event. And about an hour ago, news came up that Qin Gang, who was the foreign minister of China, got dismissed by basically a vote of the higher circles. And it's very, very paused, very watered down reporting in Global Times. You can see about it saying there's some new laws and then there's some new appointments, one to the central bank and one to the foreign ministry, and Wang Yi is back in charge of foreign policy. And literally we have no idea why or what's going on because the details are scarce. There are some, I guess we could say conspiracies in the Western media, but really nothing we can launch on. Maybe we could start there, but we have Mr. S.L. Kantham back, a very amazing geopolitical analyst. So I think we can talk about a huge branch of things, just starting here. What do you guys think?
Sure.
Well, I'll just throw in. I was catching up with McCourse the other day, and he mentioned Ed Litvak, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work. And
No.
he used, since I had a bookstore in Washington D.C., he was a customer of mine, and he would come in and propose his wacky interpretations of U.S. foreign policy, and this he really went off the rails with about China, and it's worth watching. Uh, it was so crazy, yet at the same time, as many of the people commented in the comment section, that he has pretty fair influence in among different circles here in Washington. So it was a if you think that U.S. foreign policy is nuts, Ed Litvak is there to confirm it for you.
So
Certifiable.
he's one of the
Open
what?
St. Elizabeth's mental institution. Crazy.
Refresh my memory. So he's one of the absolute nuts, not a dissenter, but one of the China hawks, the Gordon Chang type.
Yes, yes. He begins with Russia. Essentially has nothing really of significance or unique to say about the Russian situation. He realizes it's a goner. He thinks there can be a kind of Korean or Vietnam split of the country, and that Putin and the Russians will go for it, which is just, I think, naive. But China, he actually says that Xi should be assassinated, that he's a
Holy,
lunatic, that he's out of control, and that if anybody in the Chinese hierarchy has the ability, they should stage a coup against him and assassinate him because he's a madman. Belt and Road never appeared. I just thought I'd throw that out.
I
He's
I
quite
didn't.
fanatic.
Very much. I didn't see that one, but I heard very similar statements about Vladimir Putin. He's a madman. He needs to go. And you know what a madman is, someone who doesn't take orders. So I can practically see the similarities.
Mhm.
Same with Kim Jong-un. He's 100% supportive of Russia and the SMO. By the way, does anybody have a take here on why did, after Blinken failed and not Nabulina, sorry, who's Janet Yellen failed in China, they sent the 100-year-old Kissinger, properly a threat to his life at this point, to travel that far. What did he do? We have no information. What did he do? What did he talk about? Any theories there at this point?
Well, first of all, so he's had, about 50-year relationship with China. So in 1971, he made the secret visit to China, and he made a deal for Nixon to go in 1972.
Oh, he was central to
So
that. I didn't know.
yeah, you know, um, so th- this may be hard for some of the listeners to believe, but the world is run by people that we don't see. Okay, all of the politicians we see, the media, corporations, it's all just the front organizations, and behind that is like this the secret web of very, very powerful, very rich people who rule the US and Europe primarily, but they have the influence all over the world. So, and if you look at Kissinger, so he is like one of the representatives for the super powerful people who run the world, you know? So when he goes to China, then well, you can just imagine this really big picture discussions, about the multipolar world, sharing the power between China and the West, as to how the world is going to look in terms of technology, the spheres of influence, economics. So you can just imagine this, like, I mean, it's like very, very big picture, basically we're charting the future of the world, sort of the discussion. So a lot of people on social media are like, "Oh, he went there to beg China to buy the U.S. Treasuries, blah
Oh,
blah
that was
blah."
Yellen.
Yeah, but those are all like small. Uh, I mean, but chump change, discussions, But when a guy like Kissinger goes, it's like really, really very high level, and we can only fantasize about what they discussed. But it's very, very significant. And this whole year, so you can see a big change in the U.S. strategy, right? So when first Biden came to power, the U.S. representatives, they met with the Chinese, I think, like in Alaska, and it
Oh,
was
that was Blinken. They mopped the floor with Blinken for like 8 hours. He was grilled for a very long time by the Chinese diplomats. Yes, in Alaska.
yeah, right. And the Chinese diplomats were very brutal. They said, "Well, listen, uh, the days are over when you can just dictate to us, and so this is not the 19th century anymore, and you have to treat us as the equals." And then the relationship just froze, and then but nothing happened all through 21 and 22. And then starting this year, man, it was like one after another, right? It was
Well,
Bill
except for
Gates.
yeah,
Yeah,
those are industry, Elon Musk, but the big people. Well, people told me that Blinken is more important than Henry Kissinger. I'm shocked to learn that he's a small
No,
fry.
no, he is not.
Yeah.
You know, Blinken is just a puppet. You know,
He's just a rat, I like to call him. But anyway, they rejected Blinken's visit. They rejected the again the big black guy who's in charge of the military visit to Beijing. They rejected Joseph Borrell, Mr. Jungle Man from the EU. But they received Henry Kissinger with the red carpet, with the salute, and Xi Jinping met with him. That's a very, very high level welcome. So yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall where that conversation.
You
I
know,
know.
Kissinger doesn't even go to Davos anymore live. He sends in a videotape. I think Kissinger, that's an enormous part of Kissinger's legacy, is the opening of China, and
He feels it,
and
doesn't he?
what the Biden administration is essentially doing is destroying that legacy,
I think you're onto something there.
corrupting it. So
That's what would move a 100-year-old person, right? The legacy that
I
he's
can't
trying to.
imagine traveling.
So I suspect that Kissinger was there providing his condolences for China's impending collapse. I mean, anyone that reads Peter Zion or watches his YouTubes knows that China is on the verge of collapse. I mean, half their people are going to be dead by 2050. So, you know, Kissinger just feels bad for them because he was instrumental, you know, in the creation and the nice little run that they had. And so he's just giving flowers.
Yeah, that's true. The nice little run that they had. That's China in the last 20 years.
Yes.
I wanted to upload an image. I couldn't figure out how to upload an image, but it was a JPEG. It just showed the last 20 years, the increase in GDP over the last 20 years. So China was over 1,000%. The next closest was a country with like, you know, maybe 400%. But
Yeah.
are you familiar with Peter Zion, Canthan?
Yes. Yes.
So you've written some excellent takedowns of his silliness.
Yeah.
But what's crazy is just that he's, you know, he's just so popular. Like, we're gonna get a few views. You know, I'm happy with 100 views. He's gonna get, you know, 500,000 views, and he's just spouting abject nonsense.
Yeah.
And atrocity porn, you know, at the Adrian Zenz levels. They're evil.
Yeah. It's so funny, you know, like if you go to YouTube and then you search for China collapse, you'll find thousands of videos, and they all have like millions of views. You know,
High production value, flashy thumbnails, very well made most of the time.
Yeah, and they don't care how wrong these people are, right? So some guy will come and make a YouTube video saying China is going to collapse next week. Okay, and there are like actually videos like that, you know, next week, and then the next month, the same guy will come and say with no shame, China is going to collapse next month. I'm like, hold on. You just predicted China's collapse last month and the month before, you know. And same thing with this guy, Peter Zion, you know. Back in 2010, he wrote an article for the Rand, I believe, saying that China is going to collapse within this decade, you know. And he was obviously wrong.
Rand is the military-industrial think tank in the US.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. And they're all wrong, you know. And it's just, you know, so like if you look at China's growth from 1980 to now, in 42 years, the GDP has grown 100-fold. Okay, 100-fold. And it's not like a small country, like say Singapore or something, right? You have 1.4 billion people, and there were so many poor people, like 90% were living in the extreme poverty, and they stuck to their own vision of the economic and the political system, and it really bugs the capitalists. The neoliberal financial capitalists and the banksters that China is doing socialist stuff, and they're able to succeed with state-owned enterprises. Oh my God, how can you be like that? And
So
spending money
Wait,
on
I
the poor people.
let me bring it. Sorry about that. A headline from one of the money magazine. It was either Bloomberg or Forbes. Yes, China is saving the planet in renewable energies. Unfortunately, we can't make money on it because they're mostly state-owned. So the investors are really, really pissed at that, But I think
Yeah.
Billy Bob wanted to enter.
Yeah, so
well,
they
I was
just
going to say, so he declared that within 10 years that China's economy would collapse. But according to your article, which is entitled, it mentions Jim Cramer. So we were joking that he's the Peter Chang. We were joking that Zihan is the Peter Chang, a
Gordon.
white Peter Chang, but he's actually a Jim Cramer as well.
Yeah,
The
when he
guy
says
that-
something, you can bet the opposite. Absolutely.
Exactly. But since his prediction was made, China's GDP has quadrupled from 4.5 trillion to 18 trillion. So he wasn't just wrong. Like he's not just a little bit off. He's in a different universe. Like he's out of his mind. So it didn't collapse. It quadrupled. Anyway, I mean that's just representative. I mean, just take everything he says and apply that to it. It's ridiculous.
Do you remember the what is it called? The Evergrande.
It's going to collapse China, the housing problems, the mortgage.
Yeah, everything in real estate. And what it was basically a controlled demolition of a bubble, which is ready to burst in the West. And China just did that without any effect on the actual stock exchange, on the actual wealth of the people, which I think is remarkable. But everybody was singing the same tune back then.
Because they're authoritarian, Ben. They're authoritarian and they cheat. That's why they're successful.
Yeah.
By the way,
Yes,
go, Mr. Canton.
I don't know. Go ahead.
I wanted to give context because I'm Hungarian. I didn't know the name Kramer. I had to learn that later in life. He's one of these money people on CNN or Fox. I don't know, a big thing. And he's always
CNBC.
Yeah. Okay. So he says, bet on this. You have to invest in this one. And he just does the bell thing. And every time he makes a call like that collapses. So there's this in normal conversation, there's something called a reverse Kramer. When he bets on something, you bet on the opposite. And 9 out of 10 times, or maybe 10 out of 10 times, it works out. Because he always rings the alarm, or the investors think just they all never work out.
He set up people for disaster in 2008.
Oh yes,
thousands of people. I just want to let me try a little Ludwig on you for insanity. Ludwig said that he was sure that Xi was preparing for war because he talked about, and this is the word he kept repeating, the rejuvenation of the Chinese people. And the thing he cited as being evidence that China was preparing for war was that they had planted all these trees on these slopes that were barren before, but now they were cutting them down so that they could plant and produce more grain. Because he literally said this, because where would China be able to get grain from? I mean,
I have no idea.
This enormous border between Russia and China where you can just truck it in. You don't even have to,
Well, I can scroll down to Canton's down his article, and he he explains that China is the number one producer of wheat. China produces more wheat and other things too, right? Like corn,
rice, vegetables, fruits. Yeah.
So
they're not Egypt or Pakistan,
in the world, right? As far as nation states.
Yeah. So if you look at just the rice and the wheat, China produces like 4,000 calories per person per day, and then you add vegetables, fruits, with chicken, fish, nobody's going to starve, The only thing that they keep saying is China is the largest importer of food, but what they mean by food is like soybeans and the dairy products with cheese, wine, and I mean, and all that stuff. And the soybeans is basically used to feed, for the livestock, the cows and the pigs. So the Chinese eat a lot of pork, and they've been feeding soybeans to the pigs. But the pigs don't need soybeans. Okay, the pigs will eat whatever you give them. So, so like, suppose in case, first of all, like there's a lot of soybeans in the world. So Brazil and well, Argentina, but they can supply the with China with all the soybeans they need. But just in case if the U.S. Threatens to bomb the Brazilian ships or something like that, but China can get some other the grains from Russia. For example, like sunflower seeds and corn and stuff. The pigs are not going to mind if you replace soybeans with sunflower seeds. You know, so I mean, this whole thing is so ridiculous. First of all, so let's say the U.S. wants to stop the shipments to China, but that's not going to happen. Okay, so China is the largest trading partner for 120 countries in the world, and it's the second largest trade partner for 70 more countries. Okay, so nobody is going to let the U.S. just bomb Saudi oil that's going to China, or Brazilian ship that's carrying soybeans. So this whole the concept of, if we just like stop the Malacca Strait, then we have a stranglehold over China.
Yeah, 20 years ago, maybe. But that's what the Belt and Road Initiative is about. The Malacca Strait no longer has a stranglehold on everything that China. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, so then you look at. I mean, so first of all, so why would all the other countries, like say Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Angola and all of them, why would they let the U.S. Stop their ships from going to China? That's against the international laws. But more importantly, the U.S. economy, it depends so much on Chinese goods. Can you imagine?
And the
what would
consumer
happen?
market. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Walmart and the Amazon and all of the retail stores in the U.S. They'll have the empty shelves, and there are going to be riots, right? And and on the first day of the war, but China is going to take over the Apple factories, the Tesla factories, Walmart factories, but Nike, blah blah blah, and the U.S. stock market will lose like with trillions of dollars, like with 20-30 trillions of dollars will just evaporate on the first day of the war. I mean, and then you look at the U.S. The military. Well, if you look at the U.S. The missiles, the fighter jets, they all depend on the rare earth minerals, the permanent magnets, and all of them they come from China.
I think a week ago, we talked about the first real restriction, which was gallium and germanium, and that is exactly where it's used. It was perfect. And by the way, China has most of that, but there's another place in the world that can actually do that as a side effect of heavy industry to produce gallium and germanium. Unfortunately, it's in the Donbass, so that's not going to happen for the US. It was a perfect move, perfect diplomatic move. Go on, Mr. Kenton.
Yeah. So, I mean, the gallium and the germanium is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So, the US depends on like 40 different critical minerals from China. And the gallium and the germanium is just the beginning. It's just like the first shot across the bow, you know. And then
Yeah.
you have all these rare earth minerals. And I mean, I think of batteries, right? It's like a very, very simple thing that we take for granted. But
Very
90% of the,
advanced industrial
yeah,
processes that lead to that battery. Yes.
yes. And like 90% of the batteries in the world, they come from China.
They do.
Okay, so just imagine the U.S. economy trying to run without batteries, right? I mean, millions of batteries they fail every day, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so it's just you know, they're not going to be able to do anything to China. And uh, uh, then also China can do the same thing. You know, as China can block the trade for
Tit for tat.
Japan, South Korea, right? Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore. You know, they have the world's largest navy, but the ships don't travel long distance. I think it's like 1,000 mile radius.
It's a
But
defensive navy. Yeah.
yeah,
What's the opposite
right.
of a blue water navy? The blue water navy is supposed to be global, and they have, I don't know the other phrase, but that's just a local navy. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, so they can stop the trade for all of the U.S. allies in South China Sea, and yeah, I mean, how? I mean, to think of like, say, the medicines and the antibiotics. 90% of the antibiotics in the world come from China.
Mm.
So how is the world going to survive without Chinese medicines? And if you look at some countries, like my country, India, they produce a lot of pharmaceuticals, you know, and they ship it to the U.S. But for 75% of the APIs or the raw materials for the pharmaceutical drugs in India, they come from China. Okay,
To
so
India.
like if you stop China, then we cannot produce any medicine. The whole world will die. So yeah, so I mean, it's just madness to say, and you know, so Peter Zayan has this like crazy theory, you know. He's like, yeah, well, the U.S. just has to leave the Asian area, and then all the other countries are going to gang up on China. No, okay, those countries
They'll
they
finally
want
be, they'll be
He,
friends finally without
he's,
the
they'll
he's
be
U.S.
literally
friends.
saying that the U.S. is there protecting China, and if China leaves, everybody else is going to attack China. Like
Yeah.
that's
He
his
lives in,
analysis.
he lives in another
Oh my
dimension,
This
God.
guys.
guy.
No, he
That
needs
makes like
analysis.
absolutely no freaking sense, right?
Yeah. So
Call
I
him
want,
So
Dr. Freud.
I wanted to add a couple of things. I don't know if anybody else wanted to as well, because that's the stick. China has that stick. You're going to die without us, okay? But there's also the carrot, you know, because China has. I watched the graph. I wish I prepared and we could share it now. About they have the largest what do you call it? The consumer, not the consumer sector, but the consumer society, as in people with disposable income who travel, who buy shit, the latest gadgets, watch movies, all that. Not nobody who wants to export anything, and that includes digital material, movies, not just things, can exist without China. They want a part of that huge market. And if someone were to cut that off, I read some, this is the financial news. I don't know if it was FT, Bloomberg, you know, one of these, but German industry, Volkswagen, Mercedes, they have fallen way behind. What is the Build Your Dream, the main EV manufacturer of China? That's
Bide.
the BYD. Yeah, exactly. And that's not the high tech. That's not the beautiful luxury car. That's the everyman's vehicle, and you can get it for like 15,000 or something. Remarkable. They've fallen behind that. And once you fall behind, we learned that back in the day with Japan, you always play catch up unless somebody sabotages you, as happened with them and the Plaza Accords. But Germany's fallen back. And the other headline, exactly the same territory, was Tesla. And Elon Musk was there, including his platform, which is now X. That's the new
X.
Twitter. I don't know why. He's running circles around German automakers. That was also one of these Forbes or Bloomberg headlines. And yeah, basically China didn't do that. The US did that, but there's no turning back. If you want to build some stuff and you want to have profitability, you can't live without China. Carrot and
Right.
stick. I want to add that.
Yeah, and so many times I see on social media that China makes only cheap products, you know,
1990s,
and
yes, it's a knockoff factory, isn't it?
yeah, and they don't understand that, but China does both, you know. So if you look at China's the exports, 40% are low tech, but 60% are medium to high tech, you know.
Yeah, the
So
DJI drones, that's very sophisticated technology. You need a massive chain of electronics and physics and very well trained students to create something like that. That's Chinese.
yes, and so for example, if you look at, I mean, with Tesla. 95% of the components that go into the Tesla, they are made in China by Chinese suppliers, you know. So you look at the Tesla wheel, the body, the frame, the door, the windshield, the electronics, all of them are made uh, by with Chinese companies. The only thing that is not Chinese are some of the semiconductor chips that go into the Tesla car. So they are very, very advanced. You know, they are building their own space station. They are number one in
Guys,
5G.
imagine whatever country you're living in to have a lunar program. Imagine the years of R&D, the physics training, the massive chains of industrial processes of electronics that goes into a lunar space program, which China has. It has its own space station. So unbelievable. I'm surface level when I follow you on Twitter. I know all this data, but on surface level, I just look at museums. I look at subway stations. I look at it's like sci-fi. It's like stuff I dared to imagine when I was a kid. That's what's alive in China today. But
Right.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the best thing is, I mean, to go to China. Okay, so like that would be like the best, the $2,000 that you would ever spend. I
it's the
mean,
You want
antidote.
to take empty suitcases. Take empty suitcases.
yeah, you know, so you land in Shanghai, and then you see the sign for maglev train. So you pay like $7 or something, and then the train will literally floats above the ground. Okay, so the wheels don't even would touch the rail,
Doesn't have wheels.
and huh?
It doesn't have wheels, but you're correct. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe it doesn't even have wheels, but it floats above the rail, and you go to the downtown Shanghai at 450 miles an hour, and you go, oh my god, and then you step out of the train station, and then you see this skyscraper that's was 600 uh, meters, yeah, 600 meters tall. And then you see these amazing, beautiful subway stations, subway trains that go at 160 kilometers per hour. and the malls, the luxury malls, the hotels, they look like freaking museums, And they're, oh yes, so we have this thing from 700 years ago. We were like, wow, and
Have you been to
uh,
China a bunch, Kenthan?
yeah,
Or
just once.
one time?
Yes, and I was there when I mean the COVID broke out. So, but I didn't know at that time. But I saw like a lot of people were sick and were coughing everywhere, and I'm like, wow, this is like a really bad flu. And then I came home, I turned my phone on, and they go, oh, there's a virus.
Wow.
I
But
wonder.
I never got.
This is
But
harking
I
back. Sorry, go.
no, I mean, but I never got sick. Because I have a good uh, the natural immunity.
Good constitution, natural immunity. I have two Putins right here, so I got the Sputnik. But anyway, the less spoke about the pandemic, the better. But I wanted to harken back to your point about factories, which I don't know if you know Alex from Reportify Media, also iChongqing channel. He's lived for 15 years in China. There's also Angelo Giuliano for about 10 years plus in China. They're wonderful. I wonder if you've talked to them. And they use this phrase that Europe and America have Lego factories. Basically, everything is built in China in little components. They ship it in, put it together like a Lego, and look, we put a made in America on it. And that's basically what it is. Now, just imagine severing that tie that holds it together. On the point of the automotive industry, yes, we have BYD, we have the beautiful cars, but I just wanted to show you something that has become my absolute love, and I'm going to share it now. This is a honky, basically a limousine, but it reminds me perfectly of the Chaika, the armored Soviet limousine. It's the most Russian-looking Chinese car I've ever seen. It's for diplomatic stuff. It's like 2 tons. It's a V7 engine. It's not one of those EVs, but they also make this stuff, okay, that you've never heard of before. So I thought I'd put it up. It's just, they make everything.
I mean, so this was the first the Chinese car. I believe that was built in the 1950s or so. It was like one of Mao's first project.
Oh, this is brand new, but maybe it's
Hongxi.
based on the one. Yes, Hongxi, but this is the brand new V7 engine, so it's a new take on that car.
Yes,
This is what Xi
sure.
Jinping uses. Yep, today.
Yeah.
When he visits.
Guys, I was hoping to sidetrack the discussion. I mean, it's really, in line with everything we're discussing, but I'm going to be a little long-winded, but, we don't have a hard break.
Good. And we have plenty of topics.
When I was, becoming politically aware and trying to figure things out, I came across 2 different, approaches to China. So you have Western leftists, even people call themselves Marxists or communists. They were really anti-China, and they had a narrative about China. They said that, Mao was a good socialist, but then when Deng came, he turned China towards capitalism. And so now they're no better than the U.S. They're just capitalists. And I was confronted with that, and I was trying to figure, is that true? And I've come to the conclusion that the actual narrative is way different from the one that these Western leftists or Western Marxists proclaim. So I have a quote from Mao in 1945, and he's talking about, people wonder why us communists want to embrace capitalism, but we need to embrace capitalism. So this isn't Deng in 1970. This is Mao in 1945 saying, the ultimate path of China is through capitalism. We have to develop the productive forces. We have to industrialize. We just can't let the capitalists and the imperialists have control of our political of our state. But we need to allow them to invest. We need to get investment, and we need to develop. So I don't see Deng as being a break from Mao. And also when Kissinger and Nixon came in the 70s, China didn't make a decision to open up. The West made a decision to end their unilaterally imposed economic embargo. So it was, the self-sufficiency that Mao practiced was due to the Sino-Soviet split and the Western embargo. So he had no choice, but that wasn't his first choice. Like his first choice was to do, I think, what Deng ultimately did, but it wasn't within his power. So what Mao did, he lobbied the West and he said, look, you guys don't have anything to fear. End your embargo and let us be part of the global economy. So when I talk to Western leftists that condemn China for opening up, for liberalizing, for allowing Western investment and private ownership of industry, I asked them, like, would China have been better off if they just maintained this, self-sufficiency and this isolationism? Would that have been good for your average Chinese person? And if the answer is no, like, what is socialism to you? What is Marxism? If it is not the improvement in the material conditions of the actual people, of the workers, then it's a worthless ideology. So to me, like I said last show, Canthan, that's what Marxism is to me. It's the the identification and the pursuit of the pragmatic increase in material conditions and the quality of life for the vast majority. So what a tremendous decision. We've talked for a half hour about how China has rendered itself impregnable to economic assault and to military assault. There's no way that the West can destroy China economically. They're too integrated. You said over 90% of the planet's countries are China's either number one or number two trade partner. You're impregnable. You're not going to be able to sanction China. You're not going to be able to defeat China in an economic war. And like Ben was saying, the Navy and the whole military is purposed for defense. So you're not going to be able to attack China. So I just wanted to hit home those points in my loud, boisterous way. I mean, these are important things for people to get. Like, China made the absolute right decision, and it wasn't a break with communism. It was totally in line with Marxism, in that it resulted in the China we know today, a strong, impregnable China that the people are doing well. It's the most efficient increase in material conditions and quality of life we've ever seen in the history of the known universe. And it's tremendous. I've seen people are getting on board with this. People are getting on board. People on the right, Scott Ritter, and I mean, I'm not saying Scott Ritter's on the right, but I mean, he could be a cultural conservative, but he's saying, thank God for China. I'm hearing Scott Ritter say, thank God for China. And that's a refrain I've stumbled upon for about, 4 or 5 years now. I've really been impressed with China, and there's no other way to say it, but thank God for China. And I think the more people focus and try and figure out what's going on, the more they're going to come to that inevitable conclusion. Okay, that's the end of my rant.
If I know Mr. Canton, he doesn't like ideology, but I look forward to hearing this.
Sorry.
Like when you talked about Mao in 1945, so he was a visionary, and he wrote letters to Franklin Roosevelt, to President FDR, and he said, "Hey, listen, why don't we work together? We have a lot of workers, and you have a lot of scientists and manufacturing. We could have a good synergy, And so he foresaw the Chimerica, right? It's with China plus America. So he foresaw, how there's, there could be the symbiotic relationship, and the U.S. could have just done that, and we could have just avoided the whole Cold War. We could have just avoided the Vietnam War, the Korean War, all the chaos for 50 years.
Well, and I mean, I say it every program. The West has really squandered its leadership. After 1945, the U.S. assumed the leadership role because they accounted for half the global economy and just 5% of the population. So with that vast disproportion of wealth and power, They had tremendous influence and they just misused it and squandered it so badly. And people are really ready for a change. And what China offers is vastly superior. The peace through mutual prosperity offered by China is way better than what is the West offered? I mean, it's our way or the highway. You're going to subordinate your interests to the interests of the West, whether it's economic, military, political, and so everybody's sick of it. Everybody's sick of it, and we're moving on. Thank
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
I mean, the West had like you said, the U.S. had a very, very good opportunity. I mean, after the end of the World War, there was like absolutely no reason uh, to pull down. I mean, the Iron Curtain with the USSR, which was an ally of the US during the World War II, and the Pentagon made some propaganda movies that you can still find on YouTube, and they praise Russia. Okay, so for like 45 minutes, this documentary talks about how wonderful Russia is. And then you watch the movie, you fall in love with the Soviet Union, and then all of
That
that
didn't
changed
last.
at the drop of a dime. Like a few days after Hitler died, Churchill was already planning on like an invasion of the Soviet Union.
And nuking it,
It
yes.
was, and it was called the Operation Unthinkable, you know. And then these mad people in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s and the 1960s, they drew up so many plans, to bomb the heck out of China and the Soviet Union. In one of the plans, they were able to identify 1,000 cities in the Soviet Union and China to drop nuclear bombs on 1,000 cities.
I think
You
you
know?
must have been the one to share this because I saw this on an interactive map that you can explore still today, which was based on the plans drew up by the British and them. So every time somebody says the Iron Curtain, I have to say that's fucking Churchill's Iron Curtain. It wouldn't have happened on Soviet initiative. But please go on.
Yeah, because Stalin had no problem dealing with the capitalists. Mao had no problem dealing with the capitalists.
Neither
You
did
know,
Kim.
yeah,
Kim Il-sung.
exactly. So you have your system, I have my system, but that doesn't have to prevent us from being friends by being trading, by helping one another. There's like absolutely no reason. But there are these people at the very top. They would thrive on the divide and rule. They don't like peace, as George Orwell said. When you think the government is waging a war on somebody else, well, actually, the government is waging a war on you. You know, and
Broken
it's
clock, right twice a day. Fuck that snitch, but yes, you're right on that. I want to emphasize that there was this wonderful moment in history when Kim Il-sung, Stalin, Mao, they got along fabulously, by the way. All three nations, practically the same. So it was Vietnam, completely lockstep. And then
yes.
Khrushchev, unfortunately, happened, very much a result of Western meddling within the Soviet Union itself. And then the Sino-Soviet split, the rest is history. But basically what China did, when I was distracted because trying to source this, I saw this somewhere, proper source, when in the late 70s, Mao introduced Deng Xiaoping to Kim Il-sung, saying, look, I'm old. There's not much left in me, but this guy, he's a trained revolutionary. He knows what to do. You should get to familiarize. Not many people knew about Deng Xiaoping at that time. He's the future. This was after the Sino-Soviet split. So that's when the MLMs, the Marxist-Leninist Maoists, so-called in the West, they don't exist in China, said, oh, they restored capitalism. Look at them. The yoke of the wage slavery has returned. They took the US for a ride. They saying, you can come in here. We get technology transfer. You get your stuff. You get your cheap labor. You get your high profits. But basically, what I mean, socialism with markets. Markets are not evil, basically. Even to a limited extent, the Soviet Union had markets. My country, the People's Republic, had markets. China has markets. That does not constitute in itself capitalism. When someone becomes a monopoly in the markets, for example, let's say Huawei with technology, what it becomes is state-sponsored or state coordinated. And there you go. There's no two or three people vying for monopoly and just gouging out the profits. It's just done. This is essential for the people now. And they are allergic to that in the West, to government control and government ownership of the profits. And they also really, really hate fair competition when they're losing.
Well,
Again, remembering the example of Japan, but that was what I wanted to add.
I think the Cold War, I mean, you know, there was not a coexistence primarily because the West feared a good example. They feared the threat of a good example. And given that we know what a superior system a communist run government is, now that China is the proof, that's why one of the reasons I say thank God for China, because like they've been a communist party in power since 1949. And I mean, it's been the best ever government in the history of the known universe as far as developing, you know, improving quality of life, etc. So the West feared that, right? So that's why they sanctioned. That's why they didn't give that opportunity to North Korea, to Cuba. Those countries are still under an embargo because, and the reason is, if you lift the embargo, allow them to trade, everybody will see it's a way better system than oligarchy. It works a lot better than a capitalist dictatorship, and it can benefit people's lives in a much greater way. So that's why they keep their, you know, they use their power to keep their boots on the throats of these societies. They made the mistake in China of letting their foot off their throat, and now they're trying to figure out how to put it back on, but it's too late. It's done. They lost.
Yeah, you know, because
Other than media silence, there really is not much they can do. Sorry, Mr. Campbell.
No, good. You know, yeah, you know. So just imagine a guy from San Francisco going to Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen. You know, he walks around, drives around for a week, and he can't find a single homeless person. You know, he takes the subway. There are no drug addicts. There are no crazy people. There are no homeless. There's no trash. You know, he's like, wow, how is this possible? What kind of a world am I in? You know,
it's not America.
Yeah, so he's going to come back to America and say, hey guys, well, check this out. You know, I went to China, and the public transportation is so cheap, and then you have world class. Okay, so it's not like the BART system in San Francisco. It's like so high tech and so clean and so nice and so on time, and you don't have to wait for more than 1 minute on the average. You know, but there's one train after another, and people are so well behaved and they're so nice. How is this possible? You know, and then he's going to cause.
But at what cost, Canthon?
Oh,
at
yes.
what cost? Exactly.
That's one of the Zihanisms of the world. But at what
at
cost?
what cost? You know, China has improved. Okay, so they brought down the pollution in Beijing by 70%, but at what cost? Okay, because the doctors they're now getting laid off because there are not many sick people in Beijing. Okay,
For fuck's
so
sake.
was it really worth it? Was it really
Think
worth
about
it?
the doctors.
Think about the doctors. You know,
So ridiculous.
It's
You know,
so ridiculous.
To me,
The
I know
Chinese-
that.
The genius of the Chinese was when the opportunity that Nixon and Kissinger offered them. It seemed to me that they already had a way of exploiting. That's probably the right term. That
It is.
opening, and they did a hell of a job. And the other situation with the traditional U.S. Foreign policy. I'll give one example: is Ho Chi Minh and the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, Ho Chi Minh went to where the Treaty of Versailles was happening because the United States had promised them that they would have their independence from the French. and that was one of the stipulations. And of course, when Ho Chi Minh appeared there, here's a man who accepted the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution as a model. And when he tried to simply talk to the legates, the representatives of the U.S. there, the U.S. Marines literally threw him down the stairs of the building that they were meeting in,
Oh,
and
literally. This isn't
that
figurative.
literally threw him. Yes,
Wow.
and that was kind of a wake up call for him. So I just, it's the U.S. just can't anticipate. Uh, I just wanted to point that out. I don't know it's real relevance to what we're talking about.
No, it exists.
But
Go
it
back
was,
to where you come from, Little Yellow Monkey. That was, I guess, World
but,
War One. But
but look at Vietnam now. I mean, it's in a way, it's like a little China. So the other thing I wanted
Yeah.
to say is that the reason Kissinger, one of the reasons, major reasons that Kissinger and Nixon opened up China was because they feared Japan again as being an industrialized country, and they wanted an alternative, and they just totally miscalculated the talent that was there in China. They just and they to Kissinger it might be half a mistake to have approached it in the way
I'm
they did.
I'm going to give a third reason just to be part of this because other than Billy Bob, nobody has to agree with me, but he probably does. But they followed Stalin's footsteps, and for his life, he fought against the huge bureaucracies. He didn't want that. He did the August plan, which is a cybernetics program. He said that's just going to decimate the huge bureaucracy and make it actually dynamic and responsive to the people, like China is, because it's hugely integrated in the informational sphere. That's what Stalin wanted. Then Khrushchev, the fuckhead, came along. And basically, that was axed, that program. And these opportunist assholes came along. And China, I think, saw these developments, saw what it would lead to, not just the Sino-Soviet period, but, the 70s. You could see the writing on the wall soon enough. There were big problems in the consumer goods and all that within the Soviet Union. They said, okay, if our big ally is going down, we need a lifeline. And they continued. Basically, Deng Xiaoping learned from that mistake that the Soviets made. And he said, we're not going to make that mistake. Also, side note, they never, ever going to do tomorrow what the Soviets did to Stalin. Basically, for them, that was the hugest sin that could ever be done. The secret speech, I'm talking about Khrushchev, where he was this horrible dictator and all that. And they saw that with horror. So basically, I think those factors are what led to China choosing this specific road. And as a final point, China doesn't really think in, I'm going to be in this political office for 2 years or 4 years, and I had to plan for that. They think in decades. They always have. Come on, this is a 4,000-year-old civilization, people. One of the earliest. Before the pharaohs had anything, the Chinese river band societies were like already an established civilization. My
Right.
thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, but we think that it's, so easy what the Chinese did, but it's not,
No. It's
because,
massive.
because they had to find the perfect solution, right? It's like somebody gave them some sushi and burrito, and they said, but now you have to make a new meal out of these two, and they really struggle with it like all through the 1980s. So if you look at the Chinese economy in the 1980s, it really fumbled. They struggled with the very high the inflation, and jobs were not being were created, and they struggled with the prices, the motivation. There were like a lot of problems, and that was also like one of the reasons behind the Tiananmen protests, because people were not very happy with the
Of course.
economy. So, and then there were also like a lot of the Chinese people, the leaders, who wanted to go full capitalism.
Oh, the Gang of Four, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So the people like Milton Friedman, he went all through the 1970s and 80s, and he brainwashed a lot of people, So, so they had to fight with that, and then they had to struggle with the poor people. They were not very well educated. So how do I mean, so it took a lot of efforts, right? I mean, like you had to balance like with 30 balls in the air when you're juggling, so you had to raise poverty, you had to create jobs, you had to move like 900 million, maybe 1 billion people in the farm to the cities. So how are you going to manage that? How are you going to create jobs? You had to build schools, colleges. You have to make sure the economy doesn't crash. You have to manage the currency. You have to
China
do.
Yeah, and
China's
let's
built
not forget. Sorry, go Billy Bob.
well. China's built hundreds of cities that have more than 1 million people from scratch.
And more
So
Yeah.
GDP than any European nation. That's a Chinese, I think, second tier city, not the big ones. They have more
Yeah.
GDP than any European nation.
Yeah. I mean, so people think that's easy, okay? But I can tell you, as a person who
the West doesn't even try.
lives
They're
in
not
India,
interested.
yeah,
Go.
so if you go to, I mean, the Indian politician, and you say, hey, why don't we move 50 million farmers to the cities? The guy would be like, are you nuts? We can't do that. It's
I mean,
way too complex. It's way too, there are a lot of challenges.
that's a perfect comparison, Mr. Canton, because I was going to say that to understand China today, you have to understand China in the 1940s, fresh out of the opium, absolute horrible. They call it the century of humiliation. They kept the palace that the Chinese and the Americans smashed to bits, exactly like it is, like the people in Belgrade did, to remind them that's never ever going to happen again. And they were like Soviet Union's times what, fourth, fifth, I don't know how many times, because it was already well above 1 billion people in primitive, not even mechanized agriculture, no power anywhere. It was 1920s in Russia, but worse. And to get from there to high-speed rail, maglev, and a space program, now that's no small undertaking. So it's a very good comparison, because India, as much as it's projected by Bloomberg and other people to have the second greatest growth in the world, it has a very long way to go to do anything close to that.
Yeah,
What do you think?
right. So we are so behind, but that's why I'm able to appreciate China's progress, because as a person who lives in a third world country, I know how hard it is to, to pull yourself up. And the big difference between China and the West is in the West, the banks and the corporations, they sit above the politicians. Okay, so they control the politicians.
Yep.
And in China, it's the opposite.
Yeah, and they
The
really
politicians,
hate that it's the opposite. Yes.
yes. Okay, so the politicians, they control the banks and the corporations. So that's like the first reason why the West hates China, because it's a wrong model. It's like, hold on,
For
no, no,
them,
no, no,
for them it
no.
is.
For them.
Yeah, right.
For the
For them,
people of
you can
China,
call the people's police if you see your boss doing some corrupt shit, and they will be on your side. Imagine that. Just imagine.
Yeah, I mean, and I have looked at. First I didn't believe it, and I think I couldn't find it. But you can go online, and so you can take a look at the annual financial statements of the Chinese banks. Because they are public and they're traded, and you will see. So if you take a look at the financial statement of, say, J.P. Morgan or Bank of America, and then you compare that to Chinese banks, you'll see a huge difference in the language, right? So the U.S. bank, they will boast about the first thing that they will boast about is the share price and the dividends. You know, they're like, we raised the share price by 70%, and we gave back $45 billion to the shareholders. Yay! You know, and you read the Chinese bank statement. They're like, we gave $100 billion in loans for poverty alleviation. We gave $30 billion to build homes for the poor, and we gave $4 billion to provide tractors and drones for the farmers in this region. It's all about the people, you know. Go, oh my God, it's like completely different philosophy of life.
So yeah, I mean the West is constrained by short-term profit seeking. So there, because it's a for-profit system run by individual capitalists. The policies are going to be those things that are that best, advance that are profitable. So in China, they're not constrained by just doing what's profitable, because often what's profitable for rich people isn't necessarily in the best interest of the vast majority. So I think Karl Marx might have pointed that out a while ago. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
it's like the
I mean,
Russian military industry, as we've seen now. It is purpose oriented, not profit
yeah,
oriented. It's
same,
okay.
same thing.
It's okay if it's profitable, but that's not the goal. The goal is the defense of the motherland. And I wanted to show you this because what China doesn't have is this casino capitalism. This struck me when I first saw
hey,
it.
that's my chart.
Is it your chart?
Yes.
I'm sorry that I didn't.
No, that's okay.
I just grabbed it from Twitter and I thought I'd share it because it's amazing to me that derivatives. I'm not a very well versed money or market person, so maybe I should hand over the microphone to you
No, that's okay.
because it's shocking. No, please describe this because this was just insane
How
to me. When I
fortuitous that we stole your chart and it wasn't somebody else's who's not here.
hey,
Yeah, so basically, I mean, as I made the chart, I tweeted it, and somebody just borrowed it, but that's okay.
yeah,
Uh, so basically, it looks at the top four banks, and then you look at the assets versus the derivatives, you know,
there's Canton
and
2030.
then
You're right.
yeah. So in the top, the U.S. banks like J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, so they all run on the derivatives. They have very few assets, but hundreds of trillions of dollars of derivatives, right? And what are the derivatives? They're
Yes,
basically
please.
bets. Yeah, so like you just bet on the crazy things. So what is going to be the interest rate, what's going to be the value of this currency or that the commodity. It's like a giant Vegas.
Yeah,
And they just bet on so many so many things on both sides. So they think they're so smart. So they bet on the value of the pound going up, and then also the value of the pound going down, blah blah blah. So it's like a huge ticking bomb
if that's not a
waiting to
ticking
be.
bomb, I haven't seen one. You're exactly right.
Yeah, very, very dangerous, right? I mean, so the whole the Western the capitalism, it moved away from the production to fugazi. It's all fluff. I mean, so it's basically financialized capitalism, right? So if
Yeah.
you don't produce anything, what do? You start to create crazy ways to make money. So you tell people, hey, why don't you buy a house and then it's going to go up in value by 30%? So you get into the casino capitalism of the homes. So so you buy a home, and then you say, and then if I'm a bank, I mean, if say Ben is a bank, and he wants to sell more mortgages, he will come to me, and he will say, "Hey, why didn't you buy Billy Bob's home?" I'm like, well,
It'll go
no,
up.
that's too expensive. I don't have the down payment. And
I'll
then
help you
Ben
out.
goes, "Don't worry about down payments. Who needs down payments?" So then I buy the house. I'm hoping for the next fool. You know. But this is not real economy.
No.
This is just. I mean, this is like the bubble economy, right?
Yeah.
And in the same way, they basically financialized all sectors. So if you look at the big pharma, 75 at 80% of the new drugs, they are basically the same old drugs that they sold for the previous 20 years with minor modification. Okay,
Yeah.
so they changed this like one molecule, but it has absolutely no effect
It's a brand new
on
drug. It's the
brand new
same
drug.
component. My dad
When
is
they
a
can
professor
sell
of
it at a
anatomy.
premium price, it's no longer generic. It can't be
He told me
generic.
Right.
this many times that you're not. It doesn't matter what's on the box. You are getting the main ingredient. They always just tweak it. Yep. Every year.
Exactly. And then, yeah, so they will, like they would say, "Oh, but this drug you had to take but twice a day, but we have a new drug that you can only take
Repackage.
once a day." Oh, wow, what a great invention. And then they charge you, I mean, like, but think of,
You
I
know.
mean, diabetes and, I mean, insulin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Basic fundamental needs of people. Yes.
fundamental stuff. And I mean, the insulin was discovered, invented, whatever, 100 years ago. Okay, so like if you look at the technology, well, insulin should be as cheap as a bottle of water. So it's been around for 100 years. There's nothing magical about insulin. Uh, but then you look at the cost in the U.S. Some people have to pay $1,000 a month to get
Yeah.
insulin for
I've seen.
the diabetics.
Yeah.
So, so you just will create a predatory system because you don't have anything else to produce. Like you don't manufacture. So then you just pay somebody $5 to make a bag, like I mean a handbag, and then you put a seal on it saying Gucci, and then you sell it for $500.
Yeah.
It's
What's worse is what you just described. They call in the financial literature captive market because what does a man with diabetes have? What's the choice? I pay this, whatever. I've seen some of the bills. They're horrific. They scare me shitless. You pay or you die. And that's it. Those are the two choices you have. And
Or
that's
you
what's
cross the
really,
border to Mexico and
that's been happening at an increased
buy
rate.
some
Yeah.
less expensive.
yeah.
medicine.
So by the way, well, I got diagnosed with diabetes about 2 years ago, and so I went to the doctors. Of course, they said, "Oh, so you have to take this drug, that drug." I'm like, so hold on, so I need to go do some research online. So I spend, a week doing the research. I go, man, this makes no sense, because all these drugs are, have huge side effects, and they don't really fix the foundational problem.
Mm.
you know so it's like, like you say, the house is on fire, and they give you a mask.
Good luck.
Hold on, yes, I can breathe with this mask, but you're not solving the fire. Like,
Yeah.
or yeah, so it's like but terrible things. And each drug, whatever drug you look in the Western medicine, they don't solve the underlying problems. What they do is they go and find one the enzyme or one the chemical reaction, and they stop that. You know, but in the body, one enzyme does 40, 50 different things, right? So we don't have one enzyme for sugar, one enzyme for kidney. uh, Nature or God was so freaking well, efficient that they gave like each enzyme has so many different functionalities.
They
So you
multitask.
think you are, yeah. So you think you're solving one problem by disrupting one enzyme, but that's going to have so many side effects because a lot of other reactions they cannot take place. So I said, no, there has to be a way. So by the way, I would never took a drug. I brought down my sugar from 300 to 120 now. So I'm just borderline diabetes. Uh, so basically, I mean, well, if I go to the gym a few more times a week regularly, then I'll be perfect. So there's no reason, for drugs, but diabetes is a huge, huge industry. So you
Ah,
have,
yes.
yeah, so you have one arm of the corporation, sells us refined wheat, sugar, Coca-Cola, GMOs everywhere. So they make you diabetic. The
Right.
processed food, the mainstream food, they make you diabetic. And then the same, so BlackRock and all these people, they are the biggest shareholders of the big food as well as big pharma. So these two corporations, they work together. One makes you sick,
You know,
and
you're
one,
right, but that could take us into dangerous directions
yeah,
considering
yeah, okay,
both the pandemic and mental health. But it was a very interesting direction to take. And when you were saying, insulin, I thought it was a Hungarian invention, but that was penicillin, basically, and antibiotics. That was a Hungarian invention. But I don't want to get bogged down too much here. I just wish that Europe, it's an American invention, this financialization and investification of everything. But I wish it weren't the same in Europe to such a huge extent. I mean, people I know are buying cars and flats with thinking about the 10-year value, and it's just horrific. They don't buy them to live or to use anymore. Everybody has this marketization in their brain. But since the topic for the title for today's program was nowhere to go, I'm wondering, the US and NATO, the 50 whatever countries that powered Ukraine, are getting smacked in the mouth, and it's perfectly obvious to the world, like increasingly obvious to the West as well. I'm wondering what you think may come next, because they're also trying to indicate that they might try to smash Iran, where there's also tensions. The Russian fighters are also playing games with American people in over Syria skies. Blinken has issued stern warnings to the DPRK, to People's Korea, to China, that they should deal with the Korea issue before we act. And I'm thinking, like, they already proved they're out of ammo. They can't really do anything. They really want to boom into multiple war zones at once. I'm
So,
just wondering what.
and before I let Canthan address that, I want to give
Yeah.
him more to address. I wanted to point out that it's nice of us an hour 20 into our program to start actually addressing the topic, which is out of options. So the West is out of options. So the first part of our discussion, Canthan, we talked about how impregnable China is and how the U.S. has no options because they're so integrated into the global economy. Their military is strong. And yet, it seems there's this thought in the West that the only thing that can keep us from economic collapse, because of the way we've just created money out of thin air for so long, is just to do a financial reset with another global conventional war. So between these two things, yeah, what?
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. But that's the big question.
Give us all the answers. We're waiting.
okay. So as I've been, so the last time we spoke, we wondered aloud what's going to be the plan, but I think I have figured it out now by looking at these the influencers and the foreign policy analysts. So so now it's pretty clear to me
I'm listening.
that they're going to dump Ukraine and they're going to move on to China. Okay,
There's a big
and the
blame game.
way,
I think you're right.
yeah,
Go on.
because the biggest the obstacle I had in this path was, but how are they going to save their face? And then I read these articles. I'm like, oh my God, these guys are geniuses. Why didn't I think of that? So their plan is to blame it all on Ukraine and on
Zelensky.
Europe.
Oh,
Okay,
in
they're going
Europe.
to say, well, listen, from the beginning we said it's a proxy war. Okay, they're lying now, but if you look at the mainstream media like CNN and all those people, they're now blatantly starting to use the phrase proxy war. So, so now they have a perfect excuse saying, listen, we didn't lose the war against Russia. Well, if we really went in, we could have crushed those, fat vodka drinking, shovel using Russians easily. Piece of cake. But well, instead, because we don't want American soldiers to be dragged out. So this was not really a consequential war. Okay, it was. I mean, who cares about Russia? It's a very poor country. We have bigger fish to fry. So we gave some weapons to Ukraine that we're not using. Okay, so it's no big deal, and we didn't lose valuable weapons. We didn't lose any American soldiers, and we didn't lose our pride and the ego. We just said, okay, here are some weapons to Ukraine and Europe, and they lost. Okay, and they've been fighting. Like they will fight for another about 2 years, but that was really never our concern, because our
Can I
goal is actually China.
can I underline your point? Just today on European Euraktiv, it's a very EU central magazine. They brought out an article, and the title was "The Bundeswehr has a report. The Ukrainian officers are unable to act according to Western standards. They are blaming the officers now. They still think like Russians. They're not proper NATO material, and they lost the war. This big blame game is really going on. So this shove it under the carpet, as you. I don't think if I don't. Did you say that or did I? But anyway, it's actually going on. So I'm wondering. Okay, letting you to go on to purer waters. So go Taiwan. What's happening?
Yeah, so this
Obviously,
is
neither of us know, but we could speculate.
yeah, so this is like the perfect. I mean, the pivot, so that Biden can win the re-election. I don't know, but more importantly, the U.S., the military, the industrial complex can move on to the next project uh, uh, without facing any pushback from the public. You know, so then they will say, oh, so we have to build these four new military bases in the Philippines. We are building a new base in the one more island, I think, Papua New Guinea, and they
India,
will,
right? Did India agree
you
to
know,
host?
A naval, what do you call it? Service station, I think, some kind of a base. Yeah, that's India.
yeah, and they'll, send more weapons to South Korea, Japan. So their plan is to start a war in like around but Taiwan, South China Sea, and it's so easy to start a war. I mean, if you really want to start a war, you can start a war. And
Finishing
if
it is a different thing. Yeah.
right, as in like Vietnam, if the worst comes to worst, like you say, oh, the Chinese attacked our ship with a missile, like the Gulf of Tonkin, so you can just make up
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and the people
Yeah.
are so brainwashed about China, like if the CNN says we have some evidence that Xi Jinping personally pushed the button on the missile, 70% of the people will believe it. So these mad people. I mean, I don't know, what their the plan is, because when the U.S. military it ran all these the simulations in the war in South China Sea.
Yep.
The U.S. lost every single time to China.
Yeah, and what they did this with Ukrainian Russians too. They tweak variables, saying, well, they're disorganized, well, they're low on ammo, and even then they couldn't win. They introduced, I think, Scott.
They adjust the inputs until they get closer to a victory, but then it becomes unrealistic. But the whole problem is, the reason Russia was first, I think, for these people was because, they don't want to take on a united Russia and China. So they were trying to weaken Russia, destabilize it, regime change it, balkanize it, and then China would be ripe for the plucking. But they didn't get the first one, and yet they're going to go to the stage 2. I believe you. I think you're probably exactly right. And that just demonstrates the craziness of these people.
Yeah,
if that's Plan B, that is insanity.
It is.
Sorry.
Because I mean, I wrote like a few years ago. I said the best strategy for the U.S. Would be to make friends with Russia, okay, and then you draw Russia like away
Trump
from
was
China.
trying to do. That was Trump's policy.
True. People forget.
Yeah, that would have been like the most
thoughtful.
I mean, the rational and the Machiavellian thing to do. Just like I think it was, President Eisenhower, who brought in Khrushchev in the 1950s. And he let Khrushchev travel around the U.S. for 2 weeks, and he fell in love with America.
Khrushchev did, yeah. He brought Kadar along, by the way.
Yeah, so that would have been like that the Machiavellian thing to do. Bring in Putin, shower him with praises. Like make him look like a hero, and say, yeah, we're all one big family. Germany, Russia, and America. So let's all stick together, and then you slowly.
Look at those stinky Reds in China. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been
exactly. But instead, they did everything wrong. Like the guy, Brzezinski. He warned in the
Grand chessboard.
Yeah, he said, whatever you do, okay, so don't bring Russia, China, and Iran together, okay, and then you lose like the biggest portions of the Eurasia, and these people they all have a lot of the grudges against America, and they will make the perfect and the most dangerous threat to the American primacy.
And it shows the dysfunction within the U.S., the Western ruling class, because Trump represented a minority faction that wanted to do that. I believe that was what he wanted to do. But the dysfunction was so great, they can't get their act together. And I mean, that's just one of the weaknesses of a capitalist dictatorship. You've got to play. You can't be upfront and open. You've got to always lie about what you're really trying to do. And then you have internal fighting.
Yeah. And therein lies another question. Just how much of the U.S. oligarchy is along with this? Because you can hate Brzezinski all you like. I do, but he was a thinker. And so was Henry Kissinger. So despite Elon Musk, Tim Cook, I don't know, whoever else, Microsoft guy, and Kissinger going to China, they obviously represent that part of the ruling class that wants to get along. Who's winning? I know the military has issued stern warnings that, sorry, guys, we're going to lose. The military is against it. Some Silicon Valley people are against it. Who's for this insanity? And what do the scales look like?
Yeah, so
well, I know Biden.
The dilemma. So so there are but two dilemmas. Okay, so the corporations which run America, they have a love-hate relationship with China. because when they can sell, they make a lot of money by selling stuff to China. You know, whether it's Microsoft or Tesla or Pfizer or J.P. Morgan with their the mutual funds, but they can make a lot of money in China. But the problem is that the Chinese are very fast learners. Okay, so you go into China with one product. Within 5 years, okay, they'll have a product that's pretty good, pretty close to your product, right? And then they start to eat away your uh, the market share, and the Western the capitalists they're so greedy that they don't spend enough money on the R&D. You know, so you look at I mean Intel, Cisco, and I mean and all these guys, they waste hundreds of billions of dollars on
Advertising.
yeah, okay, and then also on stock buybacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
Same for Samsung in
So,
South Korea. Yeah.
yeah. So if you look at, I mean, the S&P 500, like over the last decade, they spent $9 trillion on stock buybacks. It's like freaking crazy, you know. They could have spent like 1/10 of that money, like maybe $1 trillion on uh, the R&D, and then they would be far ahead of
Yeah. I mean, at least you're building
China.
technology that people can use and benefit from.
Uh-oh.
Huh?
Billy Bob froze.
Benefit from that whole entire industry. So
So
it's a
the-
system that's inferior. It's an inferior system, and the only way they can compete, they can't compete. It's not a competition. They've already lost the competition, so they compete by destroying, you know, creating a war. That's going to be the only way they can compete.
Yeah.
Even though they don't openly admit it. I mean, they say we're all for competition, but there's no competition going on. There's no investment in competition. The U.S. doesn't have a
Yeah.
plan for competition. The ruling class has. They're going to destroy. They're going to try and, you know, destroy them through.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
think
so now
Carlo
they
wants to say
have-
something.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry, Carlo. You've
yeah,
been
sorry.
very patient while we've been off.
Well, I'm just listening, but I wanted to just say it's also a problem with fiat currency. You just print money, you give it to the banks at 0% interest, and of course they take it. The banks and the corporations take that money and buy back their own stock. It's just
Yeah.
because that's
it's a
where the
vicious
biggest
cycle.
profits are. That's
You
where the
mean
profits are.
it didn't arrive in your wallet? You didn't get any, like, you can mint a
Oh
trillion?
yeah, no, I've made a fortune on. You know, I'm sitting pretty. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
No,
So
I didn't make a penny off of that.
based on the three of
So
you
by the way,
comments,
you know,
these
I mean,
sorry.
sorry, I mean, well, until like 1982 or so, the stock buybacks were not allowed. You know, they were not
That's true.
legal.
They were.
You know, like there was a
Reagan
ban.
opened up that
And-
Pandora's box.
Yeah.
That's right.
and it's just yeah, I mean, and it's just a waste of money. You know, so now they've placed 1,000 Chinese firms under Western sanctions.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have to place sanctions because they are falling behind China. You
By the way,
know?
that's
So
a tiny amount when it comes to Chinese corporations, but probably big and important ones. I just want to summarize what the three of you said. So basically, they'd like the 1990s gravy train to continue so they can capitalize on cheap labor and not really innovating. But it won't go on with current China, not the way it is, because it's not neoliberal. It's not like them. And that's why I can see the corner they're painting for themselves. There really is no alternative to just another smash and burn, do you think?
Are you saying they're out of
Yeah.
options, Ben?
Hey, the title drop.
Yeah,
But they
so
are. They
that's
are out
number
of
one. You know, so basically, the corporations are losing in the innovation. I mean, we look at 5G. Uh, uh, the Chinese, they own 40 to 50% of all the patents in 5G. And then if you go back and you look at the U.S. innovations like the Bell Laboratories, I mean, the AT&T and with GE and all those people, they were so innovative, right? I mean, you look at 1950s, 60s, 70s, and it was all Americans who were like doing great things, you know. And now China owns like 50% of all the 5G patents. So, uh, so, but that's number one. You know, the biggest the problem that China represents is the technological threat to the Western capitalists. And you lose the technology, you lose the primacy, okay? Because it
Yeah.
runs the world. So that's number one. Number two is uh, the debt and the problem with de-dollarization, you know, and because of the sanctions on Russia, the rest of the world wants to move away from the U.S. dollar because they don't want their foreign exchange reserves to be seized, and they've now woken up to the unfairness of the dollar system, the Bretton Woods and the petrodollar. So Xi Jinping, he went to Saudi Arabia last December, and with 20 Arab leaders, they flew in to meet with him. And so he basically said, we will soon start, buying oil and gas in Chinese yuan. You know, and they were all like, "Yay!"
It's begun.
So, yeah. So the de-dollarization is a big threat to the oligarchs in the U.S. Because that's how they're able to build the military, but control the world, bully the people, sanction the countries.
Marco Rubio does not
Beat,
like it.
Yeah,
yeah,
in 4 years, who are we going to be able to sanction? I just want to, on that point, don't forget Africa. Russia is reopening practically all embassies in all of Africa. They closed in the 90s, and they sent Vicky Nuland to South Africa to put pressure on everybody not to go to the upcoming Russia-Africa summit later this month. I don't think it's going to work, guys. I don't think you have any power over those people anymore.
yeah,
No point.
No, not when you hear Ramaphosa from South Africa and the Kenyan president very eloquently saying, enough is enough, we've had it. And other officials from South Africa, they've articulated their position, and it doesn't include the U.S. So,
Yeah, there might be one. There's always one in Africa and in Latin America. There's one little captive country which is fully US, but not the rest. Seriously, 90%.
no,
No, we're done.
Liberia,
Yeah,
the birthplace of AFRICOM,
yeah.
maybe.
yeah.
Not
I
much.
know. Yeah. So so how are they going to stop China's progress in technology, and how are they going to stop de-dollarization? You know, uh, I mean, well, in a very rational world, they will actually sit together with China, Russia, and everybody, and they will say, "Okay, guys, so let's stop all the wars. Let's focus. Let's compromise."
I wish we lived there, you know.
You know, uh, so rather than doing full de-dollarization, so how about we reach a compromise? So we do 40% de-dollarization, and then these oligarchs would come back to America, and they would say, "Hey guys, the last 40 years we went a little bit but too far with financialization. We are sorry. We're going to restart manufacturing, and we're going to stop share buybacks." and we are going to use that money to give a bonus to the employees. We are going to, raise the wages, and we are going to lift up the whole American society. So that would be like the rational thing to do.
I wish we lived there, Canton. I wish we lived in that world. Unfortunately, instead of that, I see sunken American aircraft carriers in the future, but that may be just me.
Yeah,
Heaven forbid.
but instead these the lunatics. I mean, like if you looked at uh, well, apart from the Korean War and the Vietnam War, well, in terms of the middle class, the U.S. did, fantastic from 1945 to 1970. And you look at but things like so how much the wages, raised for the bottom 50% versus the top 1%. What was the ratio of the CEO wage to the normal the worker's wage? And in the 1950s, the top rate, the tax rate was like 90%. So so you didn't have the billionaires, you didn't have the corporations with
FDR wanted a maximum wage, and Congress compromised at like 96%. They didn't
Unthinkable.
want to
Yeah.
do 100, but they did 96%. That was the maximum age compromise that FDR
Yeah.
asked.
By the way, in China, Canton will probably know this. There is a maximum ratio between the average worker in a corporation and the CEO and the leader. So there is a cap there. It's kind of the surviving maximum wage that FDR wants.
And in Germany too.
Oh, there too.
Yeah. So so you have to go back to the fundamentals, and we have to realize that we're all linked together, you know. So the wealthy person's life, it is linked to the poor people, and the rich countries' success, it depends on the poor countries. And from the poor countries point of view, like well, if I'm in India, then I want to see the US succeed. I want Europe to succeed. I want the people to be happy, but normal, but good heart, so they don't start wars, crazy shit, so we're all linked, and it's in the best interest for each one of us to help everybody.
I think that should be a very positive concluding thought. What do you guys think? Most of the people around the world learn their history starting with the Greco-Roman, the Roman Empire. I thought it was enough when the plebeians just marched out of Rome. They were the ones who worked, and the aristocrats said, fuck, we're fucked without them. We would have learned this same lesson taught to us by Canton today, like a long time ago, and remembered it, but we keep forgetting. That's my final thought on this.
Yeah, thanks, Canton, for joining us and giving us that positive, approach that we should all embrace and seek. But we're not in power in the West. There's different classes in power. Let's hope they take your advice. Carlo, you've been quiet. I know you're in a little bit of distress with your ailments.
I'm sorry. I'm in pain. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry you're in pain, but we were glad to have you with us, even though you weren't saying too much. Thanks for listening.
I was glad to listen.
Yeah, I thought it was a great show, Canton. We will have you back very soon. I appreciate your commentary. It's really good, and I think I don't think there's any disagreement between us. We should find some. Maybe next show we'll look and try and find some disagreement to liven things up. But
yeah,
absolutely.
Wonderful insights all around. And maybe we should plug a bit of a please like and share. Thank you for everybody who watched. I know it's cheap, but maybe we need it. So thank you for everybody who's been with us.
We definitely like to have these views proliferated. We don't have a lot of control over how they get disseminated, but you know, the algorithms are put down. People like Zihan get mass proliferated, and we get relegated to just a few viewers. So any help we can get in that regard would be great. Okay, I'm going to hit end broadcast. We will see you on Thursday at the Foreign Policy Review. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.